30 years ago, doctors started recognizing a Schedule III controlled substance had a powerful potential to heal severe mental health conditions and chronic pain. That medicine was ketamine. And the use of ketamine has since exploded, with celebrities sharing their healing stories while others have suffered from addiction. But with online sales of ketamine booming, many of my patients distrust what these predatory companies are telling them, especially after the opioid epidemic ruined millions of lives. They're concerned that these companies aren't disclosing the risks of ketamine therapy, especially addiction when used without direct doctor supervision. I'm Dr. Anthony Cave, a Stanford and Harvard-trained anesthesiologist and integrative medicine specialist. I've guided thousands of ketamine sessions, and I'm going to share the painful politics of medicine that risk the potential benefits of ketamine being overshadowed by predatory business practices, and what you can do to find healing while protecting yourself from big business interests. I once had a patient tell me that their online ketamine provider was complaining to them about being late to fill their ketamine prescription. She was understandably weirded out and stopped using them. But how did we get here in the first place? To understand ketamine therapy and the risk of addiction, you need to understand the politics of medicine. These are all easily verifiable facts, so no conspiracy theories here, just painful realities. Then we'll discuss why the politics of medicine have led to this problem, what ketamine addiction actually looks like, and what to look for in a safe ketamine therapy program. Ketamine is a 60-year-old medicine used for anesthesia, and it's curiously effective for certain mental health conditions like depression, PTSD, and anxiety, and it can also relieve chronic pain. But these are off-label uses of ketamine because its only FDA approval is for anesthesia here in surgery and procedural sedation. Even though these are off-label uses though, they can be very effective, often with few doses needed to achieve a lasting effect, unlike traditional psychiatric medications that are taken every day. And those benefits appear to be stronger than traditional antidepressants, with response rates reaching 70% for ketamine in its IV form. On top of that, the side effects of ketamine therapy are relatively rare, unlike traditional antidepressants. Now, if you've been struggling with depression or PTSD, you might think this is a miracle treatment and that it's available for everyone. But it's not, and it's not even covered by insurance. You see, ketamine is so old that it is off patent, making it very difficult to convince insurance companies to pay for it. That's because you can't make money selling generic medications that are off patent. And since it can cost billions of dollars to study old drugs for new indications to convince insurance to pay for them, it's unlikely that ketamine is going to get insurance coverage anytime soon. And that's why ketamine remains stuck in a niche where it's so effective for mental health conditions, but doesn't have insurance coverage. Remember, this is all off-label usage, and that's going to be really important in just a minute. And that means that most patients are paying cash for off-label use of ketamine. It doesn't mean ketamine isn't useful. It just means that it wasn't approved by the FDA for this purpose, limiting its insurance coverage. And that means more cash pay ketamine use leads to more revenue for ketamine programs. But there is an insurance-covered form of ketamine called esketamine or Spravato. It's a nasal spray formulation and is very effective for treatment-resistant depression, but it constitutes the minority of ketamine use. And we'll discuss that in a minute too. Ketamine was originally studied in IV form because that was the form used in the FDA-approved version for surgery. We also believe the IV form is the most rapid-acting and effective. It was later compounded into sublingual forms that appeared less effective but much cheaper. Because this is off-label use, this was done by compounding pharmacies. And providers started prescribing ketamine to patients to take at home with these lozenges. Things really exploded during COVID though, because the DEA laxed its regulations and allowed for teleprescription of controlled substances without a physical patient-doctor relationship, effectively opening up the floodgates of telemedicine prescription. And because ketamine is a Schedule III controlled substance, this was a boon. It allowed for rapid growth of telehealth ketamine programs where the ketamine could be mailed to patients' home without them ever having to visit a doctor in person. Patients could literally take an anesthetic medication at home without any direct doctor supervision. It's because the FDA has no regulation on how at-home ketamine usage should be monitored. How is that possible? Remember I said ketamine is used off-label for mental health purposes? When ketamine was being approved for anesthesia, it was never considered consider that it would be used at home, so no requirements were ever built into the FDA protocols. And those decades-old approvals mean that there's no guidance for at-home usage today. It's a super niche regulatory spot. Have you ever been frustrated by how insurance companies work and how certain medical procedures might be so helpful but don't always get coverage? Let me know in the comments below what your experience has been. But why does any of this matter if ketamine works so well and is so safe? Like, if people are feeling better, what's the problem? The problem is that people aren't always told the risks of ketamine therapy, just like they weren't told the risks of opioids decades ago. Fortunately, those risks of ketamine appear much lower than the risks of opioids. For example, overdose deaths including ketamine appear well under 1% by the CDC. But Matthew Perry's tragic death makes it critical to prevent ketamine addiction, not push people towards it. And that's what I fear is happening today with the growth of these telemedicine ketamine prescriptions. Now, the medical community is still learning about the abuse potential of ketamine, but the risk of misuse and addiction appears very low in monitored medical settings. We believe this is largely because in supervised settings, patients are not getting whopping high doses of ketamine that risk activating addiction centers in the brain. Heavy recreational users may use up to 90 times higher doses of ketamine, and that's where addiction risk and side effect risk shoots up. Now, we don't fully understand how ketamine is addictive because it's fundamentally different than traditional addictive medications like cocaine or opioids. It doesn't have traditional withdrawal symptoms either, and it doesn't cause the other long-term addictive changes we see in the brain in response to dopamine. And this is where different ketamine therapies differ in philosophy and patient safety. Because IV ketamine was the original form. It's administered in a medical setting with a doctor directly supervising you. You're being directly monitored and you're using a safe dose. You don't do IV ketamine at home. Most patients do a handful of IV ketamine sessions a year to maintain their mental health benefits. It's simply not used every day because every individual session can be quite effective. Sublingual ketamine lozenges are totally different. Most patients are receiving these lozenges through the mail directly to their home, where they're taken under the tongue without any doctor directly supervising you. It's also not clear how many sessions people should have over time. It could be one a week, one a month, more or less frequent. Unfortunately, when more doses are taken, the risks of side effects also increase. The main long-term side effects of ketamine therapy are addiction or bladder injury, what we call cystitis. In fact, the first report of cystitis with ketamine therapy was in a woman who had been using ketamine lozenges in capsules several times a week for several months. We don't yet fully understand how ketamine causes this bladder inflammation, but in some severe cases, it can be permanent. Fortunately, though, most cases appear reversible, meaning that if the patient stops using the ketamine, the bladder inflammation resolves itself. But even if it does resolve, we lose access to this potentially powerful tool, because if someone has developed cystitis with ketamine, they're probably not going to go back on it again in the future. While the risk of bladder injury increases with the frequency of ketamine use, what about the risk of overdoses like with opioids? Unlike opioids, ketamine does not depress the respiratory drive the same way, meaning that patients are typically still breathing. So overdoses look very different. High doses of ketamine can raise heart rate and blood pressure and precipitate heart attacks in susceptible individuals. But the real risk comes when folks mix ketamine with other respiratory depressants, where an overdose becomes much more likely. Like I also mentioned earlier, ketamine doesn't have withdrawals in the same way that alcohol or cannabis or opioids do. There typically isn't diarrhea or tremors or vomiting. Withdrawal from ketamine is largely psychological. It's kind of like being stuck in your head. There aren't very many reports on this yet, but it's as if someone is withdrawing in their brain, with more psychological distress than physical distress. Like any addiction, ketamine addiction sounds scary. Fortunately, there are easy ways to greatly minimize these risks. First is to avoid unsupervised use. Patients should always be told that it's critical to not control your own supply. Next, your doctor should also be screening you for any history of addiction or substance use disorder. While ketamine therapy can actually be very helpful in certain addictions, it can also become addictive itself, which makes it very important to be working with a doctor expert in this field so that you don't trade one addiction for the other. Importantly, your doctor should also be emphasizing how to get the most of every session to minimize the total number of sessions that you need. need. I always tell my patients I want to give them the most juice for the squeeze, meaning I want them to have the maximal benefit with every session so we can use the fewest number of sessions safely possible. It's not that the individual ketamine sessions are inherently unsafe, it's about limiting the total exposure. This is very different than clinics emphasizing doing more infusions or more boosters, or telehealth providers sending more and more prescriptions to folks. Lastly, if you're struggling with depression in particular, your doctor should also be sharing the merits of the FDA-approved form of ketamine, Spravato. Esketamine can be very effective for treatment-resistant depression, like you see in this chart here from the Journal of the American Medical Association. Esketamine may also have a lower risk of addiction compared to racemic ketamine, or the traditionally used form of ketamine in IV and compounded lozenge forms, though we don't know for certain yet. Either way, it certainly does not seem any more dangerous in this respect. By virtue of being a different form of ketamine, Spravato is actually covered by insurance because the company spent billions of dollars to help approve it to gain that insurance coverage. This means that Spravato is covered by most major insurances for treatment-resistant depression. Unfortunately, prior authorizations can make it hard to get approved sometimes, and it's not FDA approved for anxiety, PTSD, or chronic pain. It's important that you discuss this with your doctor though, because it can be life-saving, and it has FDA approval for this indication. It also needs to be given in a clinic with a mandatory observation time, and it can be a powerful adjunct for many of our patients with IV ketamine. So like all tools in medicine, ketamine has its place, especially when rapid results are needed. When used with responsible doctors, the risks are very low. But when the patient-doctor relationship is compromised or non-existent, I have concerns that this powerful medication can cause real harm. And as always, there is never a panacea or miracle cure out there in medicine, ketamine included, and you should always discuss the risks and benefits of starting any medical treatment with your doctor first. To learn more about my practice with IV ketamine and Spravato, paired with deep diagnostics to uncover any hidden contributors to depression or chronic pain, visit my San Francisco clinic's website at www.claris-health.com. If you learned something new, leave a comment and hit the like button, and please share what you've learned with your loved ones. Subscribe to keep up with all of my medical content, and remember, you have more power over your health than you've probably ever been told.